clarity is not light. It is the death of blindness. People imagine awakening as a sunrise, golden, tender, merciful. They do not know it is closer to a winter dawn, cold, surgical, and quiet. When illusion dies, the soul does not sing, it shivers. You think you want truth until it removes what warmed you. You think you want freedom until it asks you to surrender what defined you. When clarity comes, it does not hand you wings, it takes away the ground. The man who once learned from pain has now entered silence. Pain taught him to see. Now, sight begins to teach him to die. Not the death of body, but the death of everything that pretended to be I. The world, once alive with meanings, now appears bare. He walks through it like a ghost among symbols that no longer speak. He sees lovers holding hands, laughing, believing they have escaped the void. He sees merchants selling dreams dressed as products. He sees preachers promising eternity in exchange for obedience. And he sees, above all, the theater of striving, the grand opera of human will, endlessly rehearsing the same act of becoming. He watches. He feels no contempt, only distance. It is not superiority, it is estrangement. For once you have seen through illusion, you cannot pretend to participate in it without tearing your soul apart. This is the abyss, the space between seeing and belonging. Here, clarity is both gift and exile. You are awake, but the world still dreams. You reach for connection, but find yourself speaking a language few understand, the language of silence, of acceptance, of things that no longer promise. And yet, within that silence, something begins to move. Not comfort, not meaning. Something older, something bare and clean, like wind passing through an empty room. He learns now that every illusion dies twice. Once in the mind, and again in the heart. The mind accepts truth quickly, it sees through the veil and says, I understand. But the heart, stubborn, sentimental, clings to what it knows. It must be torn away, piece by piece. And that tearing that is the real death before freedom. The philosophers call it renunciation. The mystics call it dark night of the soul. The modern call it depression. But they are all describing the same sacred dismantling, the moment when the self, exhausted by pretending, collapses into its own absence. He begins to notice that he cannot return to who he was. He tries, he laughs at small talk, nods at old ambitions, rehearses old desires. But the taste is gone. The play has ended, though the stage still stands. And it terrifies him. For all his former suffering, there had still been movement, a will to overcome, to grow, to reach. But now even that will falters. He sees through every motive, every chase. The curtain has fallen, and the lights no longer deceive. He stands before the raw machinery of being cold, infinite, indifferent. This is what clarity does when it is pure. It burns the last refuge of self-deception. It kills even the will to believe in meaning. He does not yet know that this death is mercy. He only feels the emptiness. It feels like standing on a cliff where the wind howls through your ribcage. Every identity he once wore, thinker, lover, believer, achiever, lies discarded on the shore below. He whispers, if I am not these things, who am I? And the abyss answers, you are the one who asks. That is not comfort, it is exposure. For to see the self as question rather than certainty is to begin dissolving. Days pass in this quiet dissolution. He no longer fights, yet he cannot rest. He senses something immense and impersonal watching through his eyes. The will that once screamed for satisfaction has fallen silent, and in its place there is a vast stillness, not peace, but the prelude to peace, the hollow before the dawn of understanding. He begins to sense that death was never the opposite of life, it was its condition, that all things live by dying a little in each moment, and that what he called me was only the illusion of continuity, stitched together by fear. He looks at the trees and sees the same rhythm, growth, decay, silence. He sees the waves crash and retreat, never claiming permanence. He sees that the universe is a breathing of appearances, and the self just one inhalation among many. When this realization lands, something in him lets go. He no longer needs to be eternal. He no longer demands to be special. He can finally exhale the first true exhale of his life. Clarity had felt like death, because it was death, the death of illusion, the funeral of the false self. But as the ashes settled, freedom began to whisper beneath the dust. It did not speak in grand words. It said only this: you are not the flame, you are the light it leaves behind. Loneliness does not begin when people leave you. It begins when illusions do. There is a loneliness that follows understanding, not the loneliness of being unloved, but the loneliness of being unable to return to blindness. He walks now among others, but he no longer belongs. They speak the language of pursuit, of becoming, of achievement, of meaning, and he understands every word, yet none of it reaches him. He feels like a ghost who still remembers what it was like to be alive. At dinner tables, they talk of plans. In cafes, they talk of futures. In the bright cities of optimism, they chase purpose like a prize in the distance. He watches not with contempt, but with the heavy tenderness of one who knows. They are not foolish, they are necessary. The world requires dreamers to keep it spinning. If everyone saw through the game, the stage would collapse. And so he smiles, listens, nods, playing his part with just enough grace to not disturb their sleep. But inside, the silence deepens. It is not sadness exactly, it is a kind of purity, the clarity that comes when all noise has been drained. It feels holy, and yet unbearable, like standing in an empty cathedral long after the last prayer has been whispered. He walks home through streets that used to thrill him. The lights now seem like decorations for a party he no longer attends. He hears laughter behind windows, and it echoes like an old memory, a sound from another lifetime. The air is thin, not with despair, but with truth. He realizes that every joy had been a form of forgetfulness, and now that he cannot forget, he cannot truly be happy in the way others mean it. He can only be awake, and awakening, though beautiful, is a solitary act. At night, he lies awake and watches the ceiling as if it were the sky. Thoughts come and go, not wild, not dramatic, just precise, bare. Everything wants to continue, he thinks, even the illusion of self. He remembers how Schopenhauer wrote that the individual will is a drop torn from the ocean of the cosmic will. And in that separation lies suffering. Now he feels that truth physically, as if the ocean is calling him back, and the self, the small I, resists dissolution. The loneliness is not because he is alone, but because the I senses its own impermanence. It is the loneliness of a shadow, realizing it was never the body that cast it. He watches his reflection in the glass. The eyes stare back alive, but no longer filled with ambition or fear. He feels like a visitor in his own skin. It is not depression, it is detachment. The slow unbinding from the lie of ownership that this life, this identity, this set of stories belongs to me. But the mind rebels. It always does. It whispers, without self, what remains? And the abyss answers again, reality. Reality vast, indifferent, magnificent, cruel. It does not console. It does not negotiate. It simply is. And in its isness, it is complete. It does not need meaning. It is meaning. To see this clearly is to lose one's appetite for illusion. And yet, clarity does not feed the heart, it starves it. That is the paradox of awakening. You are liberated from falsehood, but deprived of comfort. He begins to feel that life itself is neither gift nor curse. It is weather-changing, moving, indifferent to those beneath it. Some days are Sunday, some are storm, but none are personal. To understand this is to walk through life without the shield of sentiment. And that nakedness feels at first like loss. Then, slowly, like truth. In solitude, he starts to see the architecture of his old attachments. How every love he had was secretly a plea not to vanish. How every success was an attempt to prove existence mattered. How every belief was a fortress built against the terror of silence. Now, with the walls gone, he sees the open plain. It is vast, terrifying, and utterly beautiful. He no longer looks for meaning. He looks for honesty. He no longer prays to be spared. He prays to be clear. And clarity comes in fragments, not visions, but recognitions. He notices how a leaf decays without protest, how a river accepts the shape of every stone, how clouds dissolve without farewell. He sees that life itself survives through surrender, and that resistance, the constant insistence on I, is the root of human torment. He recalls the words of the mystics that freedom is not the triumph of the will, but its extinction. He had once rejected this as pessimism. Now he feels its precision. It is not the negation of life, but the end of the fever that mistakes desire for being. He begins to taste this freedom in small moments. When he stops reaching, stops naming, stops wanting, the mind quiets, and in that quiet, reality breathes through him. No meaning, no narrative. Just the pulse of existence, vast, cold, alive. Sometimes he weeps, not from sorrow, but from the sheer weight of clarity. It feels like standing before an ocean at night, the horizon invisible, the sound endless, the self infinitesimal. There is terror in it, but also reverence. He realizes that reverence without ownership is the purest form of love. To love reality is to let it remain indifferent, to accept that beauty needs no audience, to kneel before the void and say, "You owe me nothing." And in that act of surrender, the loneliness begins to change shape. It does not vanish, it expands. It becomes a solitude shared with everything that exists, a companionship of silence, a fellowship of impermanence. He no longer feels cut off from the world. He feels diffused through it, a ripple in water, a breath in wind, a brief awareness in an endless cycle. He has not escaped the abyss. He has simply learned to live inside it without fear. There is a quiet joy in this, not the joy of possession, but the joy of alignment. He no longer tries to conquer suffering. He allows it to pass through him like weather. He no longer demands that the sun return. He stands in the dark, knowing that light and shadow are one movement, two expressions of the same indifferent perfection. This is the wisdom of the abyss, that nothing needs saving, not the world, not you, not even pain. The loneliness that once felt like death becomes the birthplace of freedom, because only the alone can finally see that the world was never separate from them at all. And when that realization settles softly, wordlessly, the man does not rise in triumph. He simply breathes. One breath, one truth, one stillness. He is not he anymore. He is the breath itself. There comes a point when the mind no longer struggles, not because it has won, but because it has seen the futility of resistance. It is not peace. It is exhaustion turned into insight. The will, once a raging storm demanding shape and permanence, now lies like a sea after thunder fled, reflective, infinite. He no longer asks questions that require answers. He no longer prays for meaning. He simply exists. And in that simple act, existence itself begins to reveal its pattern not through revelation, but through absence. There is a silence that follows awakening. Not the silence of calm, but the silence that arrives when everything that could scream has. It is not comfortable, it is not kind. It is vast, impersonal, unending. He stands in that silence, and for the first time sees what remains when the self no longer speaks. The body still breathes, the world still moves, but the old pronoun I has lost its authority. It hovers at the edge of perception, a ghost without substance, a sound that no longer corresponds to a form. He realizes now that the self was never more than grammar, a convenient fiction, a linguistic habit that the mind mistook for reality. He remembers the philosophers who warned that what we call I is merely the will's reflection, a flame believing itself to be the candle. And now that the flame has burned low, he can finally see the wax, ordinary, finite, melting toward nothingness. There is no tragedy in this, only clarity. For all tragedy depends on the illusion of importance. Once that illusion dissolves, the world remains, but drama dies. He watches thoughts arise, move, dissolve like smoke patterns in an invisible wind. He feels sensations ripple through the body, hunger, warmth, fatigue. But there is no longer anyone to claim them. They happen, they are observed, they fade. This is what the mystics meant when they spoke of death before death. Not annihilation, but transparency. The disappearance of the mirror in which the universe once mistook itself for a person. At first, the emptiness is terrifying. The human mind is addicted to edges, to shapes, to stories. To stand without them feels like drowning in light. He wants to cling to something, an idea, a memory, even pain, but everything slips through his fingers like water that refuses to become form. Then something strange happens. The fear begins to erode itself. It collapses under the weight of its own futility. And beneath it, there is a quiet recognition that the abyss he feared was never separate from him. It was him looking back. The silence he stands in now is not emptiness. It is the fullness that appears when the noise of becoming ceases. It is not absence. It is essence unveiled. He sits for hours, watching shadows move across the floor. He feels time lose its edges, no longer a line, but a circle, an endless turning without destination. The mind, deprived of narrative, grows still, and in that stillness he senses something immense, a presence with no name, no boundary, no demand. It does not comfort him, it does not punish him, it simply is. This is the abyss, not a void, but the raw pools of existence without ornament. It cannot be described, because description requires distance, and here there is no distance. The self has dissolved, and what remains is not he observing the world, but the world observing itself through what once was him. He recalls a dream one from before awakening, before the stillness. He was standing on the shore of a vast black ocean, the sky moonless, the waves rising like ink. He feared it then. Now he knows he was never standing on the shore. He was the ocean all along. The distinction between seer and seen evaporates. The universe folds inward, and in that folding, the mind breaks its final chain. The need for identity. He sees now why clarity feels like death, because identity must die for truth to breathe. What dies is the fiction of separation. What is born, if born is even the right word, is the unfiltered awareness of being itself. He realizes the word I had always meant the resistance to what is. Now that resistance is gone, and with it the word. He does not vanish, he simply ceases to be divided. When he moves, it is life moving. When he breathes, it is air breathing through form. When he sees, it is reality recognizing itself in motion. And in this recognition, the world becomes unspeakably gentle. Not because it has changed, but because the violence of wanting has ended. He watches the rainfall, each drop complete, unhurried, perfect. He watches the faces of others, each lost in their own dream, each believing themselves separate. He does not pity them. He honors their dreaming, for he knows awakening cannot be forced. Each soul must arrive when its illusions are exhausted. Sometimes he smiles at the irony that the self spends its whole life trying to prove it exists and finds peace only when it admits it doesn't. He remembers the philosophers who spoke of will as the root of suffering. Now he understands to live without will is not to die. It is to dissolve into the harmony that precedes choice. No heaven awaits, no reward, no punishment. Just this unbroken awareness that breathes through every form, this silence that underlies every sound. He does not call it God. He does not call it nothingness. He calls it what it is, the end of need. And in that end, he feels a freedom unlike any joy he has known, not because it lifts him above suffering, but because it removes the him that could suffer. The abyss, he realizes, was never an enemy to be escaped. It was the teacher disguised as emptiness. It stripped him of falsehood until there was nothing left to lose. And in that loss, he found the only invincibility that exists, the invincibility of not needing to be anything at all. He rises, not as a man reborn, but as a presence without name. He does not walk life, walks through him. He does not think thought arises and fades like clouds in the sky of awareness. He does not love, loves through him, without condition, without aim. This is what remains after the self disintegrates. Not void, but vastness. Not silence, but the sound before creation. Not death, but the transparency of being. And when the wind moves through the trees, he no longer hears a sound outside. He hears himself, not the old self of dreams and definitions, but the infinite self that was never born and thus can never die. The abyss does not swallow him. It reveals that he was never separate from it, and for the first time, clarity no longer feels like death. It feels like freedom. The emergence is not a return. The one who walked into the abyss does not come back with souvenirs and a story about conquering darkness. There is no conquering. There is only dissolving, and then there is moving again. The difference is that the motion no longer has an owner. It belongs to no one, and so it is free. Morning does not arrive with trumpets. It comes as it always has, a slow brightening of the edges. He wakes without the hunger to be himself. The body rises. The hands find their tasks. The day begins its old arithmetic, breath by breath, step by step, only now. It is no longer a negotiation with destiny. It is simple obedience to the moment. To call this joy would be to shrink it. To call it peace would be to decorate it. It is neither. It is the collapse of the contract that once demanded the world be something for me. Oh. He goes to the window and watches the ordinary. People moving with purpose. A child tugging at a sleeve. A bicycle leaning against a pole, its front wheel spinning lazily in a wind that no one sees. He feels no distance now, no loneliness from seeing too much. The loneliness has widened into participation, like a river that stopped resisting its banks, and in doing so discovered it was the land's own motion. What is there to claim? What could be lost? He has discovered the one immunity worth having, the immunity from the compulsion to be a character. There are echoes of the former life ambition's silhouette passing across the mind, like a cloud that has forgotten to rain. He watches it pass. He does not reach for its shadow. He does not curse its return. The old patterns still move, but as weather, not as law. A thought says, we should accomplish something great today. Another says, perhaps we are falling behind. A third says nothing and dissolves the first two by refusing to answer their questions. The mind is still capable of fever. It no longer believes fever is identity. What is freedom if not the end of fever? Not an exaltation, not a theater of victories, but a temperature that no longer climbs with every demand. To be no one is not to be nothing. It is to be unburdened by the labor of performance. The mask sits on the table. The face breathes. The air enters the lungs without needing applause. Even the word freedom feels theatrical now, a robe too ornate for a body content to be skin. He walks. A street vendor calls out prices as if numbers could be nets to catch desire. He feels the old impulse to buy something, a token, a charm, a small ceremony of possession, but he recognizes it as a hand, reaching for a hand that isn't there. He smiles to himself at the softness of the impulse. It is not wrong to buy. It is not necessary either. He keeps moving. Not out of stoic discipline, but because moving is what the day is doing through him. There is work to be done. There will always be work. The world runs on acts that do not care whether the actor has an identity. The broom sweeps whether it is held by a hero or a ghost. The page fills whether the writer's name is carved into stone or forgotten before afternoon. He understands this now, and therefore is finally capable of honest labor. He does what is in front of him without trading it for a promise. Action without bargaining. Effort without the addiction to outcome. If something succeeds, it succeeds. If it fails, it fails. He has no tribunal left inside to prosecute reality for contempt. Compassion, once a moral aspiration, has become an instinct. He sees fatigue in a stranger's face and feels a quiet tenderness move through him like a tide that needs no shore. He does not console with speeches. He does not prescribe optimism like a doctor prescribing sweets. He is simply present, and the presence itself does the only work that can be trusted. It refuses to claim superiority over another's dream. The dream is theirs. The waking will be theirs. He stands beside them like a lamppost that does not lecture the night. He notices that fear still appears, but without arguments. The body remembers cliffs, sharp sounds, sudden absences. When fear arrives, he does not draft manifestos to explain it away. He sits with it as one sits with weather. He feels its edges, its temperature, its dissolving. He learns the true meaning of courage. Not a performance of bravery, but a refusal to abandon the moment. There is nowhere else to go. He stays. The fear has nothing to fight, and so it grows tired and leaves. There are days with sorrow. The world continues to break itself open in familiar ways, news of loss, the quiet endings that never appear in headlines, the betrayals that happen not out of malice, but out of the blindness of frightened hearts. He does not spin these into a philosophy of doom. He does not spin them into a story of redemption. He holds them as they are, heavy, lightless, real. In holding without narrative, he discovers a gentleness that has no agenda. Even sorrow is permitted to be itself without recruitment into meaning. The philosophy that once structured his mind will, representation, renunciation, now hums beneath everything like a power line heard but not seen. He does not recite it. He lives it because there is nothing left to refuse in it. The will, which once commanded 1,000 postures, lies down. Representation, which once pretended to be the world, is seen through like water that forgot it wanted to be a mirror. Renunciation, once imagined as heroic, is simply the way gravity treats all things downward, patient, inevitable. He walks past the church, past the gym, past the marketplace of self. He feels the old axis of salvation turning in every door, save the soul, save the body, save the future. He bears no contempt. Salvation is a necessary fiction until it isn't. He himself was saved many times by stories that later died in his hands. He honors the ladder even after stepping off it. He would not kick it away. Ladders are for climbing. He climbed. The ground is here. That is all. Sometimes, very rarely, joy visits. It does not arrive with a parade. It sits beside him like a cat that chooses a lap without asking for permission or promising to stay. He strokes it with the care one gives to a fleeting guest. The old craving to imprison joy in permanence is gone. He knows the cruelty of such imprisonment. He knows the leash is a wound. So joy sits, then leaves. He does not say, "Come back." He says, "Thank you." What replaces the theater of self is not emptiness, but accuracy. A flower is not a lesson, nor a sign, nor an omen. It is a flower. A human face is not a test, nor a mirror, nor a verdict. It is a human face. He realizes how much suffering was born from forcing reality to be a language about him. He stops translating. He lets the world remain untranslated and thus whole. The wholeness is not dramatic. It is exact. He remembers the man. He was the one who entered pain as if it were a courtroom. He does not mourn him. He does not celebrate him. He sees him like a photograph left in sunlight, still recognizable, already fading. That man believed that life would become good when life agreed to his terms. This presence, no longer a man in the old sense, knows that life does not sign contracts. Existence is the signature before any terms are written. He tests this knowledge against inconvenience. The bus is late. A plan unravels. A stranger interrupts. Once, the mind would have sharpened into a tiny spear, ready to throw itself at the throat of reality for daring to be uncooperative. Now the spear remains on the ground, uninteresting. The bus arrives when it does. The plan is replaced by another plan that is not called a plan but a movement. The stranger finishes speaking. The moment is whole again, but it never ceased to be whole. Only the narrator ever breaks time, and the narrator is on leave. He notices the unglamorous heroism of ordinary things, the way a chair fulfills its vocation without applause, the way a door grants passage without gratitude, the way a small patch of shade saves an animal from heat and then disappears without demanding to be remembered. These are not metaphors, they are proofs that meaning survives without stories. He lives among these proofs as one lives among weather, attentive, companioned, unsurprised. When asked what he believes now, he hesitates. Belief feels like a hat he no longer needs to wear. If pressed, he says, "I believe that what is, is. I believe that the will is a fever that mistakes its heat for light. I believe that compassion is the only wisdom our nerves can trust. I believe that acceptance is not capitulation, but sight. And I believe that to be no one is the only dignity that does not depend on a witness." He says this softly, not as doctrine, but as the residue of fire. He sometimes returns to the places where pain first taught him, not to reopen the wound, but to greet the teacher. The corridor with its hospital light. The room where a phone call ended, a weather system he had called alive. The cafe where a betrayal loosened the floorboards beneath his certainty. He steps into these places, the way a pilgrim steps into a shrine he no longer needs. He feels a quiet gratitude for the severity that shaped him. Severity is a kind of love once you stop insisting on sweetness. At night, he leaves the lamp off and lets the dark fill the room. He sits in the dense, ordinary black and feels how complete it is. The absence of spectacle no longer frightens him. If a thought arises, it is small and honest. If a memory stings, he does not cover it. He lets it sting and pass. If a tenderness floods him for no reason at all, he allows it to bathe everything within reach. Emotions are weather. Attachment is the illness of believing weather owes you a climate. There is no sermon to give, but people hear something in his voice when he speaks. Perhaps it is the absence of begging. Perhaps it is the refusal to promise. Perhaps it is the tone of a witness whose testimony has no need for a verdict. When they ask him how to live, he does not hand them a map. He says only, look more than you want less than you look. Let pain instruct, let joy visit, let the will lie down. If this sounds like renunciation, it is of what never nourished you. He imagines the end, not with dread, not with hope, but with the respect one offers to an uncompromising fact. The body will fail, the breath will loosen its fist. The world will go on remembering itself without the courtesy of a memorial. This does not diminish him, it relieves him of the final theatrics. He has already died the death that mattered, the death of needing a story to survive. When the other death arrives, it will find someone already fluent in surrender. He keeps a small ritual that no one sees. Each morning, when he opens his eyes, he quietly says, nothing is owed. Each evening, when he lies down, he says, nothing was owed. Between those two sentences, life happens unresisted. There are laughs, there are aches. There is work, there is rest. There is the soft dignity of unremarkable days. He has become expert at the one art that outlasts all others, the art of not arguing with the sky. If there is anything like prayer left in him, it is not addressed to a listener. It is a posture of mind, a kneeling without knees, a bowing without a head. It has only two words, repeated without sound. Yes and enough. Yes to what is given, enough for what remains. This is not wisdom, it is sobriety. Wisdom still tastes of achievement. Sobriety tastes of water. He notices the difference between innocence and simplicity. Innocence wants the world to be good. Simplicity does not require the world to be anything. It meets cruelty without theatrics and kindness without hunger. It recognizes that both are weather and that goodness is a climate that occasionally passes over the land. When it does, he stands in it and warms his hands. When it doesn't, he puts his hands in his pockets and walks on. One afternoon, he sits in a park where the trees do not negotiate their greenness. A child's kite snags on a branch and tears. The child cries, the parent consoles. The kite is retrieved, the day continues. He watches this cycle without assigning it to a theology of lessons. It is an event, it is complete. The child's cry is true, the parent's hand is true, the torn kite is true. He feels a tenderness, as large as the sky and as quiet. No commentary forms. The commentary has retired. He understands now why pain taught more than joy, because pain undercut the debt. Joy persuaded him that he was owed more of it. Pain annulled the contract and left him solvent at last. Debts cancelled, contracts burned, ledger closed. This is the peace of being no one, no account to reconcile, no audience to satisfy, no tribunal to convince. He lives like a tree lives by weather, light, soil, time. He does not ask life for a meaning beyond the living. He does not ask death for a sequel. When people say they want freedom, he listens for the fever in the word. If he hears heat, he knows they still imagine freedom as a possession. If he hears cool air, he knows they are near. He does not correct either sound. He has given up the missionary impulse. Awakening cannot be sold. It is the end of commerce. Even the word awakening softens in him until it means only this: the end of the emergency. For years, he lived as if called to a fire that could not be found. Sirens without flames, running without destination. To be awake is to turn off the siren and see that the house was not burning. It was the heart that was loud. Silence is not the absence of fire, it is the absence of alarms. As the sun lowers and the day leans toward evening, he returns home. The door opens, the chair receives him. The room is as it was. He feels the shape of his life, the way one feels the shape of water in a glass. No drama, just containment. He does not seek to enlarge it. He does not fear its edges. He lives within them, the way an ocean lives within the horizon. Not constrained, merely described. It would be easy to call this contentment, but contentment is still a story. It presumes a protagonist who has made peace with his narrative. He prefers a smaller word that is not even a word breath. The breath goes in, the breath goes out. The body opens and closes like a door that no longer creaks because it no longer resists its hinges. This is the architecture of freedom. It is as mundane as it is final. On some nights, the past approaches and asks to be told again. He lets it speak in fragments. He does not argue with its edits. A face, a room, a winter, a sentence that ended something the way a blade ends a knot. He listens until the voice grows tired. When it does, he offers it the same two words. He offers everything. Yes and enough. The past, satisfied at last with not being corrected, lies down and sleeps. He thinks, rarely, of the word soul. Once it meant a precious gem to be protected from scratches. Now it feels like the name for whatever remains when the names are gone. If there is a soul, it does not require polishing. It requires the end of polishing. He has stopped rubbing himself against the world to shine. He has become matte, and in the matte, the world's light no longer glares. It settles. It is gentle. There is no victory here to display, only an absence of war. There is no sermon to close with, only an open window and a wind that moves through it without owing. He could say that freedom in the void is the acceptance that the void is not an enemy. He could say that the peace of being no one is the only peace that cannot be stolen. He could say many things. He says nothing. He stands. He turns off the light. The room shapes itself around the dark. In the dark, there is the sound of a city learning to sleep and of a world that never truly does. He lies down and meets the exact weight of his body on the bed, the way a coastline meets the sea without argument, without ceremony. The breath goes in, the breath goes out. If there is a prayer, it is made of these motions. If there is grace, it is the absence of opposition. The night is large and indifferent. He does not ask it to be small or kind. He does not ask it to teach. It does not ask him to perform. Between them, there is a pact older than language. To be what they are, that is all, that is enough. If you must have a final sentence, let it be a quiet one that knows the cost of sound. The will sleeps, the world remains, and in the unknown space between them, life at last is free.